Picture this. It's the year 186 BCE. You're a Roman father. Your family is respected, wealthy, influential, well-connected. You've done everything right. You've arranged an excellent marriage for your daughter. She's 16, beautiful, educated, raised carefully to embody everything a Roman bride is supposed to be. The wedding ceremony is flawless. The feast is lavish. Guests laugh. Music fills the air. Your daughter smiles when she's supposed to. And then comes the final part of the night, the part no one talks about. She's led away for the last ritual. As she turns the corner, she looks back at you one time. Her eyes aren't celebratory. They're searching, asking a question she was never allowed to ask out loud. You look away, not because you don't love her, but because you know what's about to happen. And you know you can't stop it. This is the ritual Rome buried so deeply that historians are still piecing together the evidence. What I'm about to describe is not mythology. It's not rumor. It's not exaggeration. It's documented practice. And it reveals something chilling about the intersection of religion, power, and systematic abuse. Something that fundamentally changes how we understand ancient Rome. Here's what we know for certain. Between roughly 300 BCE and 200 CE, Roman marriage law contained a provision that appears repeatedly in legal codes, but is almost never explained. In later medieval sources, it's referred to as ius primae noctis. In Rome itself, it had a different name, deditus devorum, offering to the gods. If you believe the suppressed histories of what powerful institutions did to the powerless deserve to be remembered, consider liking this video and subscribing. Your support helps bring light to practices that were deliberately hidden for thousands of years. Now let me tell you what Roman fathers never told their daughters. In Roman law, marriage wasn't just a personal union. It was a transfer of authority. When a woman married, she passed from her father's control into her husband's. This transfer was called manus. It was absolute, legal, final. But here's what the legal texts reveal. Before that transfer could be completed, before a woman could legally become a wife, she had to be purified. That's the word used in the law codes. Purificus, purified. Rome's foundational legal document, the 12 Tables, includes a provision that's rarely discussed, but unmistakably clear. No bride of proper Roman family shall enter marriage without purification by the appointed guardians of divine will. Appointed guardians of divine will. That's how the priests were described. Specifically, the priests of Bonadea, the good goddess, a fertility cult that existed at the very center of Roman religious life. Not a fringe belief, not a foreign import. This was sanctioned, respected, institutional religion. Here's what makes this especially sinister. Roman religion was transactional. You gave offerings to the gods. The gods gave blessings. A simple exchange. But in the case of marriage, the offering wasn't wine. It wasn't grain. It wasn't an animal sacrifice. The offering was the bride. Think about what that means. You're 16, maybe 17. You've been prepared for marriage your entire life. You understand duty, obedience, honor. But no one explained this part. No one told you that before you belong to your husband, you belong to the gods, and the gods require proof. Archaeological evidence from multiple sites across Rome reveals something disturbing. Purpose-built chambers beneath major temples. These weren't burial crypts. They weren't storage rooms. They were rooms designed for a specific function. Stone beds, channels carved into the floors for liquid drainage, doors with locking mechanisms. locks that could only be fastened from the outside. In 2003, excavations beneath the Temple of Bona Dea on the Aventine Hill uncovered one of these chambers completely intact. Inside, the walls were covered in inscriptions. Not prayers, not hymns, not religious texts. Names, hundreds of them, all female, each name followed by a date. And those dates correspond precisely with recorded Roman wedding celebrations from the same periods. British archaeologist Catherine Johns spent 3 years documenting these inscriptions. In her 2007 report, she writes, "These appear to be records of women who underwent some form of ritual in this space. The nature of the ritual is not explicitly stated, but contextual evidence strongly suggests it was connected to marriage rites." That phrase, "not explicitly stated," is academic language for something else. It means, we know exactly what happened here, but we're uncomfortable saying it directly. So let me say it directly. This was where priests claimed the right to consummate the marriage before the husband. The ritual unfolded like this. After the wedding ceremony, after the public celebration, after the feast, the bride was escorted to the temple. Not by her husband, he wasn't permitted. She was taken by female attendants, older women, women who had already undergone the same ritual themselves. Your daughter was led down stone steps into darkness. The air grew cold. The walls closed in. Torches flickered. She was brought to a sealed door. Inside waited a priest, or several. The sources aren't consistent. Here's what the fragmentary descriptions tell us. The playwright Plautus, writing around 205 BCE, references the practice in a comedy that was later heavily censored. Only fragments survive. In one, a character says, "The gods take their portion before any man. That is the law. That has always been the law." Another character asks, "And the bride? What does she receive?" The reply, "The blessing of purification, if she survives it." That line was removed from later versions of the play. The philosopher Lucretius, writing in 50 BCE, is even more explicit. Medieval monks attempted to erase this passage from his manuscripts. We only have it because a single copy survived, rediscovered in 1417. He writes, "The rites of Bona are called sacred, but they are terror. What the priest claims to offer to the gods, he takes for himself, and the law shields this theft with the word divine." Think about the machinery of that system. You're a Roman father. You know this ritual exists. You know your daughter will undergo it. But you can't refuse. Because it isn't abuse. It's religion. It isn't assault. It's purification. It isn't a crime. It's divine law. The system was perfectly insulated against resistance. This is what makes the practice so difficult to document. Roman women who underwent the ritual were legally forbidden from speaking about it. Not discouraged. Forbidden. The Lex Voconia, passed in 169 BCE, included provisions enforcing religious secrecy. Any woman who revealed the mysteries of sacred rites could be charged with impietas. The punishment ranged from exile to death. This is why the historical record is so fragmented. The victims were legally silent. The perpetrators called it sacred. And the only people allowed to write history were men. Men who either participated in the system or benefited from it. But here's what systems of patriarchy never understand. Silence is not the same as forgetting. And sometimes, people find ways to speak without words. In the 1920s, archaeologists excavating a villa in Pompeii discovered a sealed room. It hadn't been closed by volcanic ash. It had been deliberately walled up before the eruption. Inside was a fresco. At first glance, it looked like a standard Roman wedding scene, except for one detail. In the background, barely visible, a woman is being led down a staircase by robed figures. Her face is turned back. One hand is reaching toward a man who is not following. The archaeologist who documented it wrote, "The technical skill devoted to the hidden figure is remarkable. Her face is rendered with more care than the central wedding couple. Someone wanted this remembered. They hid it in a sealed room, hoping it would survive. It did. For 2,000 years. Think about the person who painted that image. They knew they couldn't speak. That was illegal. But they could paint. They could hide. They could hope. That isn't passive acceptance. That's documentation by someone who knew the system would try to erase what happened, and they refused to let it succeed." After the ritual was complete, the bride was returned to the wedding celebration. Hours had passed, sometimes an entire day. To everyone watching, nothing appeared out of place. Music resumed. Guests drank. The marriage moved forward exactly as tradition demanded. But Roman wedding customs included a detail that puzzled historians for centuries. The bride appeared before her husband wearing a veil called a flammeum. This veil was never removed during the wedding. Never. The husband consummated the marriage with his bride still veiled. For generations, scholars explained this away as modesty, Roman virtue, proper female behavior. Then feminist historian Amy Richland re-examined the evidence. She cross-referenced wedding customs with Roman medical texts, specifically the writings of Cyrannus, a physician practicing in the 2nd century CE. In a clinical passage discussing marriage-related injuries, Cyrannus makes an observation that changes everything. He notes that brides frequently showed signs of recent physical trauma on their wedding night. Bruising, tearing, pain inconsistent with first-time consensual intercourse. Cyrannus advises, "The veil serves a dual purpose. It preserves modesty, and it prevents the husband from observing evidence of the purification ritual, which might provoke inappropriate questions." Read that again. The veil wasn't about virtue. It was about concealment. It was designed to hide evidence of abuse, so the husband wouldn't realize his bride had already been assaulted. The entire system worked together seamlessly. The bride couldn't speak about what happened. That was illegal. Physical evidence was concealed. That was custom. And if she showed fear, distress, or trauma, well, that was expected. She was a virgin. Of course she was frightened. The machinery of silence was nearly perfect. Here's where the historical record becomes explosive. In 186 BCE, the same year we began this story, something happened that threatened to expose the entire system. A Roman woman named Hispala Faecenia went before the consuls and revealed details about the Bacchanalia, secret religious rites that had been operating across Rome for decades. Her testimony, recorded by the historian Livy, described systematic sexual abuse disguised as sacred ritual. Young men and women taken to underground chambers, assaulted by priests, silenced through religious law. The Roman Senate was horrified. They launched a massive investigation. Priests were arrested. Temples were shut down. Leaders were executed. The Bacchanalia were declared a threat to the state. But here's the part that rarely gets discussed. During the investigation, several women attempted to bring testimony about the marriage purification ritual, the rites of Bona Dea. The Senate refused to hear it. According to Livy, the consul Spurius Postumius declared, "The Bacchanalia are foreign corruptions, but the rites of Bona Dea are Roman tradition. We do not investigate tradition. We do not investigate tradition." That single sentence explains how systems of abuse survive for centuries. By calling themselves tradition, by equating age with legitimacy, by insisting that what has always been done must be sacred, not criminal. The women who tried to testify were warned, remain silent, or face charges of impiety. Most obeyed. One did not. Her name was not recorded. She stood in the forum and described what happened to her in the chamber beneath the temple. She was arrested within hours, charged with impiety and public obscenity, exiled to Sicily, forbidden from returning to Rome, forbidden from speaking to Roman citizens. She disappears from the historical record. But something else survives. In 1964, archaeologists discovered a piece of graffiti near the Roman Forum. It dates to approximately 180 BCE, 6 years after the Bacchanalia scandal. Scratched roughly into stone, it reads, "Tradition is what monsters call their crimes when no one stops them." Someone carved that into the heart of Roman power. Someone risked everything to leave that message, hoping someone someday would read it and understand. The ritual did not end. It continued for centuries. But it changed. By around 100 BCE, wealthy Roman families began finding a workaround. Instead of sending their daughters into the chamber, they paid enormous bribes. In exchange, the priests performed a symbolic purification. No underground room, no locked door, no assault. Religion, they argued, just carried out differently. The priests accepted the bribes. Of course they did, because this was never really about faith. It was about power. Once wealthy families could buy their way out, the truth became impossible to deny. This was a system designed to allow powerful men to assault vulnerable women with legal impunity. Nothing more, nothing sacred. By the start of the Common Era, the practice had largely disappeared among elite families. Among the poor, it continued for another century. They couldn't afford the bribes. The satirist Juvenal, writing around 100 CE, captured the bitterness of this reality. The poor still offer their daughters to the old gods. The rich offer gold instead. Even the gods prefer money to virtue now. The ritual didn't end because Rome suddenly developed a moral conscience. It ended because wealthy men decided they didn't want it happening to their daughters. As long as it happened to someone else's daughters, it was tradition. The moment it threatened elite families, it became negotiable. That tells you exactly who the system was designed to protect. For centuries, classical scholars dismissed or minimized these accounts. They called the evidence fragmentary. They questioned the reliability of sources. They suggested exaggeration. They did everything except investigate what actually happened. Why? Because acknowledging this practice means acknowledging something deeply uncomfortable. It means admitting that Rome, the foundation of Western law, the model of civilization, built systematic sexual abuse into one of its most sacred institutions. It means recognizing that Roman marriage was not a union between equals. It was a transaction that included state-sanctioned assault as part of the legal process. And that realization is deeply destabilizing. So historians looked away until they couldn't anymore. In the last 20 years, new archaeological discoveries and new analytical frameworks have made denial impossible. The chambers exist, the inscriptions exist, the legal texts exist, the women's names carved into stone exist. In 2018, a research team from the American Academy in Rome published the most comprehensive analysis to date of the Deditus Divorum ritual. Their conclusion was careful, academic, restrained. The available evidence strongly suggests that premarital religious purification rituals in Roman culture included sexual assault of brides by religious authorities, systematized through legal and social structures that prevented resistance or accountability. Translated out of academic language, that means this: it happened. It was systematic. It was protected by law. And it was wrong. In this horrific history, there is one thing that offers a measure of hope. The people who resisted. The woman who stood in the forum knowing the truth would destroy her life. The artist who painted the hidden fresco, hoping it would survive. The person who carved graffiti into stone at the center of Roman power. The families who broke tradition, not because they were heroes, but because they loved their daughters more than they feared the gods. The historians who preserved fragments of truth even when silence was demanded. They couldn't stop the machine, but they documented it. They left evidence. They refused to let it vanish completely. And 2,000 years later, we're finding their messages. We're reading their warnings. We're hearing their resistance. That matters. Because here's the lesson Rome tried to bury. Systems of abuse don't collapse because everyone suddenly realizes they're wrong. They collapse because enough people refuse to participate. Because enough people document the truth. Because enough people decide that tradition does not excuse cruelty. One family refuses, then 10, then 100. Eventually, even priests can't pretend it's sacred anymore. When enough people withdraw their participation, even the most entrenched systems begin to crack. That pattern isn't just ancient history, it's a blueprint. Stand in Rome today. Walk up the Aventine Hill. Visit what remains of the Temple of Bonadea. There's not much left now. Broken columns, scattered stone, ruins softened by time. Tourists pass by without realizing what once stood there. But if you go beneath the surface, if you find the entrance to the excavated chamber, you'll see something Rome couldn't erase. The names, hundreds of them, carved into stone walls by trembling hands. Julia, Cornelia, Flavia, Fulvia, women whose fathers brought them here, women who underwent the ritual, women who were never allowed to speak about it. They didn't carve slogans, they didn't write accusations. They did the only thing they were allowed to do. They wrote their names. Not rebellion, not defiance, just proof. I existed. I was here. This happened to me. That was all they could leave behind, hoping someone someday would find it and understand. We found them, and we understand, and we refuse to let Rome's version of history be the only one that survives. If this is something you've never heard before, subscribe and turn on notifications. We're going to keep uncovering the rituals and practices powerful institutions worked hard to erase. Drop a comment with your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next investigation. But before you go, I want to leave you with a question. How many other rituals like this existed across ancient civilizations? How many practices we casually call tradition were actually systems of abuse, disguised as religion and protected by law? How many names are still carved into hidden chambers, waiting for someone to find them and speak the truth the victims were never allowed to say themselves? The Roman marriage purification ritual isn't unique because it was unusually cruel. It's unique because we have evidence. Enough fragments survived. Enough cracks formed in the system. Enough people refused silence just long enough that we can piece together what happened. But the machinery itself? Abuse disguised as tradition, protected by religious authority, enforced by legal codes, maintained through silence. That machinery is universal. That's not Roman history. That's human history. The question isn't whether it happened. The question is whether we're brave enough to investigate our own traditions. Are we willing to look at practices we've been told are sacred and ask whether they're actually moral? Are we strong enough to name abuse even when it's wearing religious clothing? Rome couldn't answer those questions honestly. Can we? Because the names are still on the walls, waiting. Waiting for acknowledgement. Waiting for justice. Waiting for someone to finally say, "This was wrong. This should never have happened." And we will remember you, not as victims who stayed silent, but as survivors who left evidence, as resistors who carved truth into stone, as women who refused to be completely erased. Your names outlived Rome's empire. Your testimony outlasted Rome's laws. Your resistance survived 2,000 years of enforced silence. We hear you, and we will not look away.